Good evening and welcome to our 29th annual Henry George Lecture at the University of Scranton. I'm Jordan Petzes, the chair of the Department of Economics and Finance. It's a great pleasure and privilege for the University of Scranton to be able to welcome Dr. Philippe Aghion, the Robert C. Wagner Professor of Economics at Harvard University. Before I formally introduce our special speaker tonight, I would like to say a few words about the nature of the Henry George Lecture and the Scranton Foundation that financially supports the Henry George Lecture Series. Henry George, a 19th century American economist and social philosopher, tried to answer the question why poverty coexisted with abundant wealth in his great classic of political economy, Progress and Poverty, which first appeared in 1879 and became an international bestseller. He also advocated that taxation on land values is the only primary means of reducing poverty. Today, George's ideas on economic and social justice continue to inspire academics and activists around the world in areas including the distribution of wealth, fair, efficient taxation, social justice, city planning, development economics, and environmental preservation. Our Henry George Lecture Series wouldn't be possible without the financial support from the Robert Scranton Foundation. I would like to recognize the dedicated team of faculty and staff in my department, as well as our Audi chapter, whose commitment continues to ensure a successful Henry George event. Special thanks go to the Henry George Committee, Dr. Ed Scahill, chair of the Henry George Committee, and the rest of the Henry George Committee members, Dr. John Kallaniotis, Satyajit Ghosh, Christos Pargianas, and Aram Balagosian. Of course, this event won't be possible without the assistance of our great department administrative assistant, Ms. Janice Mekadon. Thank you all for your hard work and commitment. The Department of Economics and Finance continues to be in the frontier in terms of selecting and attracting excellent speakers year after year for our Henry George Lecture Series. It's worth noting that 9 out of our past 28 Henry George speakers have become Nobel laureates in economics after they delivered our annual Henry George Lecture here at the University of Scranton. This is over 30% of forecasting success. Last year's Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded to 3 economists. One of them, Robert Shiller, was our Henry George speaker back in 2001. Thomson Reuters poll of economists was predicting for this year that Professor Philippe Aghion, along with Peter Howitt, would be the recipients of the Nobel Prize in Economics. Well, fortunately, it didn't happen this year. John Tirole was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics, who has worked with Professor Philippe Aghion and published many influential papers together. As you may know, Jean Tirole is a French economist, as is Professor Philippe Aghion, so we got the nationality right. But Professor Aghion, please be prepared. Our special guest tonight, is, Philippe Aghion, is the Robert Wagner Professor of Economics at Harvard University and a fellow of the Econometric Society and of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He's currently the editor of the Review of Economics and Statistics, one of the most respected journals in the field of economics. Professor Aghion is a world-leading economist whose influence extends well beyond academic circles. He has received numerous awards and prizes, and he has delivered several prestigious invited lectures. Among his many recognitions, I would like to mention that in 2001, Professor Aghion received the Janssen Award for the best European economist under the age of 45, and the most recent one in 2009, the John von Neumann Medal. His most influential work is in the area of economic growth. His Econometrica 1992 paper, A Model of Growth Through Creative Destruction with Peter Howitt, is the milestone of the new Schumpeterian theory that has changed our understanding of how innovation affects growth, how innovation is the engine of growth. This article has attracted over 7,000 citations. So its contribution to the field of economics is enormous and is worthy of a Nobel Prize in Economics. Finally, Professor Aghion is the author of important textbooks, which have trained several generations of young scholars, including myself. His impressive endogenous growth theory, textbook published in 1998, has been referenced for years. In 2006, his textbook, he published another second textbook on competition and growth, and in 2009, he had another textbook on the economics of growth. The process of Schumpeterian creative destruction for Peter Howitt continues, as he mentioned this today during the afternoon presentation. He formalizes or he theorizes his own death. basically he's working on his new textbook, and that's another example of creative distraction, I guess. Our distinguished guest tonight, Philippe Aghion, is one of the very few people in the US and worldwide that can shed some light into the factors that drive economic growth, especially growth that is generated by the introduction of new goods and the replacement of old ones. The title of Professor Aghion's lecture this evening is What Do We Learn from Schumpeterian Growth Theory? We'll have the opportunity to ask questions after Professor Aghion's speech. There will be people coming around with microphones, so to facilitate taking your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Philippe Aghion.
I have to turn on this. Oh God, no, I confund my phone and the microphone. That's a good start. 1 second. Okay. This should work, I think. So thanks so much. You've been way too generous with me, introducing me. So now your expectations are too high. I can only disappoint. It's been a great honor and pleasure to be here. It's been wonderful moments throughout. And so I was scheduled to talk about what do we learn from Schumpeterian growth theory, but I will use that to address an issue which is broader, which is there a role for the state in the growth process, and what kind of role of the state should that be? And I think that there are big debates on this. How should you organize the state? Do we need the state? Should we have minimal state? And so I'll be talking about these issues. So in fact, one important thing is that if I take, for example, the case of European countries, but it was true also for various, but particular European countries, during the post-war periods, growth in European countries was mainly driven by imitation. And there was also the reconstruction. So we had to imitate and reconstruct. And we set up what we call the welfare state. And so various countries, I mean, they had it in a different form in France, England, Germany. But you had also many aspects of this here in the US, actually. And so there were kind of three main aspects of the old welfare state. One of them was that you would have a kind of industrial policy. Very much governments believed in industrial policy. You had a lot of it here as well, because defense played a big role. NASA, NIH, and NSF were created in the 50s during the Cold War years, and Boeing would not have been Boeing without the support from defense industry and many things like that. So it's a lot of what I say, I think, applies to the US actually. But it's true that, so for example, we would have industrial policy based on state-owned firms or national champions. And that was on the industrial policy side. You would have another leg, which was the how you manage the business cycle. And the way it would be done in most European countries was, I would say, Keynesian way. But Keynes, there is much more in Keynes than what people put in Keynes. So I would call that Keynesian macroeconomic policy to deal with the business cycle. Essentially, in a nutshell, when you would have a recession, the idea would be to say you have to push demand and public spending. Okay, it did well here. I mean, with the New Deal. I mean, and so those are relevant things. And again, when you had the big recession recently, it was important to push public spending. So there is a lot of truth in it. But essentially, that was the end of it. We say, well, look, you push public spending for people to consume more, and in France and other countries, there was the view that taxation was there to then, because you increase public debt and public deficits, you have to make up by taxing more. So there was a view that you would tax more later on when the economy recovers to make up for the public spending and the increased public deficit. There was no active role of taxation, really. Taxation was mainly a way to finish the thing. You see, in recession, you spend a lot, but then you have to make up in expansion, in particular through taxation. And it was no big deal that you tax firms rather than consumers. There was no big, philosophy on that. And the third leg was the welfare state to deal with social issues. So in France and Germany and other countries, we have public health is free. We had also kind of family allocation and all kinds. So the idea was to say unemployment was not an issue at the time. The issue was to make sure that everybody, even with little income, small income, would access the basic goods, education, health, and and also there will be a kind of inducement to family. So if you have more children, you get more allocation and more transfers and all that. And that was essentially the three legs: industrial policy. We managed the cycle through boosting demand in recession, which we compensate a bit by taxing more in expansion, and the welfare, which was essentially, completing the small salaries with various types of transfer. The problem is that was okay when we were, mostly imitation-based growth, because when you are in the business of imitating, large firms are okay. But it's true that also in the US you were dominated by large firms at the time. So when you have most of the economy is driven by large firms, where people spend most of their life in the same company, that's about it. You see what I mean? That's how you manage the economy. The relationship with the large firms, the macro of cycle, and then the welfare thing. But now when you move into a kind of innovation, high-tech driven and frontier innovation driven growth, then things change. And that calls for a new role of the state. Because you might ask yourself, why is it that finally nowadays people say you have to reform the state? And they are right in saying that. The solution is not the same. Of course, the Tea Party and others don't propose the same solution. But they all acknowledge that you have to reform the state. The question is, why do you have to reform the state? They never tell you what has changed. But the big thing that has changed is because we've moved into innovation-based economy. More and more, growth is about, frontier innovations which destroy jobs at the same time they create new jobs, which destroy all firms when they create new firms. So you have now the growth that we have in our developed countries is more and more a growth that involves turnover, and that's what we call creative destruction. That's the Schumpeterian part. Is that growth is through creative destruction. You create the new replace the old. The new technology displaces the old technology. The new firms displace the old firms. The new jobs displace the old jobs. And you have to find a way to do that. When you have a system like that, when you have constant entry and exit of firms and entry and exit of jobs, you cannot have the old industrial policy where you just deal with some big firms, because in fact, the big firms are no longer at the heart of the growth process. At the heart of the growth process, you have many small firms that enter and exit. So you need a kind of, you may have industrial policy, I will talk about it, but it has to take a very different form from when you have essentially the same big firms that manage the country. So already, you cannot have industrial policy the old way. It cannot be a policy of champions. The second thing is that you cannot just say, I just have to boost public demand during recessions, because there is something else. When you have innovation-based growth, you have R&D is important. Firms, you have to make sure that firms innovate. And the problem is that in recessions, firms have to cut on R&D, because typically, R&D, you need to invest. But when you have low cash flow and credit markets are imperfect, I will get back to that, typically, your borrowing capacity goes down. Firms are subject to credit crunch. So when you have big recessions, firms tend to lower, and they cut typically on R&D. And so the state has to be there to compensate for the credit market imperfections and make sure that firms can maintain R&D over the cycle. So it's just a matter of maintaining consumption. It's also maintaining investment, maintaining R&D and other kind of innovative investment. So you look not only at the demand side, but you have to look also at the supply side of the economy. So when you manage the cycle, it's as much you're maintaining consumption as maintaining investment and innovative investment over the business cycle. And finally, the social role of the state is much more than completing wages that are small. Is that now you have all the time workers going from employment to unemployment to employment to unemployment. And what you have to do is to make sure that this movement is best organized. So it's important that you be there to make sure that people who are unemployed will be retrained. And they get good unemployment subsidies, but at the same time they retrain so that they can rebound from a job to another job. And there is a role for the state in this. It's not run by the state, but the state has certainly a role to play in as much as it has a role to play in schooling. Is that this is a world where schooling is all your life. You don't just go to school and then you work and that's it. You go back to school each time you move from a job to another job. You have to recycle and you have to retrain. And there is a new role for the state here. That's what this is about. Now, the Schumpeterian growth theory that I've developed essentially formalized three ideas that were attributed to Schumpeter, but we tried to make a model and a framework out of it. And the idea is that long-run growth is driven by innovation. Capital accumulation, we know from Bob Solow, will give you growth only temporarily. But at some moment, if you have growth through capital accumulation alone, growth will taper off. You need innovation to sustain growth. For example, nowadays, we have the developing countries, emerging markets that are the imitators. We need innovation to keep growing in spite of the fact we have the new emerging countries. Okay, we cannot imitate anymore. The imitation is done by China, India, and even now China is innovating, and even India. The second thing is that innovations results from entrepreneurial activities that are innovative activities, and they are motivated by the prospects of innovation rents. Someone who innovates becomes a monopoly for a while because he produces a better good than the others, a new product. And the policy is very important because policies and institutions shape up the incentives to innovate. And the third idea is creative destruction, new innovations, displayed old technologies, this conflict between the old and the new. And it's important, and that's a big problem because you're afraid that the innovators of yesterday become the entrenched incumbents of today, and they may prevent the new innovators from coming in and innovating again. So you need institutions that will make sure that this does not happen. That's a big issue. For example, should you let political campaigns in the US be financed by incumbent firms so much? That's an issue when you deal with should you have antitrust or not. So it goes very far. All these decisions are relative to that. You see, should I let vested interest enter the political process, for example? But they might bias it against new entrants. You see, that's the kind of issues in which you get. So the thing is that during the post-war period, growth in European countries was driven by imitation. Over time, and particularly with globalization, innovation has become the driving force of growth because imitation now is done by emerging countries. But innovation, as I will show you, requires different type of policies than imitation. So it forces governments to have different policies, and it forces the state to be reorganized. So that's why some countries managed to do this transformation. I think you did it with Reagan partly those years, and others, and Clinton probably. You did some of it. The UK did it with Thatcher and Blair to some extent. Sweden did it with Carl Bildt and Göran Persson. Okay. Germany is doing it with Schröder. Did it with Schröder and Merkel. France is a big problem. France has a big problem to reform, you see. Japan has been, I don't want to say the wrong thing about Japan, but Japan seems to be, you will tell me if I'm wrong, also a bit like France, a big problem to get from imitation-based to innovation-based, although there is a lot of innovation in Japan, but it has this kind of problem of transforming. So that's an interesting question, is that you have to move from imitation-based to innovation-based. You have to transform your policies and institutions in a certain way, and you have to transform the role that the state plays. And the question is, what should we do? Where to go and where not to go? And so first let me talk about the kind of policies that are necessary, good for innovation-based economy. So the first one I want to look at is competition. Competition, when you are in the business of frontier innovation, competition is a fantastic driver. When you have competition, you want to innovate to escape competition. So that's, look at this picture. This picture is very telling. It's a pity that I cannot point, if I point, look, it's very nice because I can point there, and there I can point there. That's cool, and I don't have to move. Fantastic. This is a fantastic finding. So I'm sorry, I privilege this side and then that side, but next time I'll do the opposite. So if you look at the upper, this is the how innovation and growth in sectors, you know, that's how entry, on the horizontal you have entry rate, it's a measure of competition, how much you allow for foreign entry in the sector, and on the vertical, it's the amount of innovation. And you have the blue curve and the red curve. The upper curve, those represent firms that are close to the technological frontier in their sector. They are firms that are pretty close to the leading edge in their sector. And what happens is that when you have competition, those firms work harder. You see the blue firms, they work harder to make it. You know, you have someone, suppose you are in a classroom, and I tell you, look, I bring someone who is as good as you, maybe a little bit better than you, what will you do? You will work hard to do better than this guy, okay? But that's the blue firms. But there is the red firms. There are those who are at the bottom of the class. And I bring a good entrant. What will they do? They will be discouraged. They will do less. And you have that effect, you see? So those who are close to, but a country close to the technological frontier, it's a country that has many blue firms and few red firms. A country which is far below the technological frontier is where the average productivity of the country is very far from the US productivity, for example. It's a country that has a lot of red firms and very few blue ones. And so you understand very well that competition is very good for growth, particularly if you are a frontier country, but less so if you are a non-frontier country. So as you become a more frontier country, you should rely more on competition to grow. There is another way to show it. I don't know if you can read this slide, but the way to show that is that you have the left-hand side and the right-hand side. The left-hand side are countries with high entry barriers. You know, it's very difficult to create a firm in those countries. The right-hand side figures are countries that have low barrier to entry with high competition. And what I represent on the horizontal axis is whether at the left of the horizontal axis is countries far below frontier, and when I move to the right are countries more frontier. So you see that when you look at countries far below frontier, whether you have high entry barriers or low entry barriers makes little difference to the growth rate. What I have on the vertical is the growth rate of the country. Okay? So if you look at the average growth rate between 1960 and 2000 as a function of the entry barriers in 1960, but it makes, if you are far below frontier, it makes no difference to have barriers or not. But if you are a country close to the frontier, that means to the right of your diagram, it makes a big difference. If you have low barriers, you grow much faster. You see this point is much higher than this point. You see what I mean? So it becomes dramatic for a country close to frontier not to have competition and liberalization. You understand that? So that's the first thing. When you are more frontier, you depend more on innovation to grow, and innovation requires competition, and you need competition. And France, for example, was a country with very little competition. You had to liberalize product market. And that's a big issue because, of course, the incumbent firms don't want to liberalize product markets, you see? Well, even Bill Gates is a great guy, but you know antitrust against Microsoft. To convince Bill Gates that antitrust is a useful thing to have, you have to wake up early. Huh? So that's competition for you. That's a very big force, competition. It can lead you to do many things. And not only, as I explained this afternoon, not only innovation on technology, but also innovation on institutions, on schooling, on many things. Countries compete with each other. You compete with your colleagues. Competition is a big driving force for individuals, for firms, and even for countries who compete against other countries. You see? So that's so for example, we know that Russia, Soviet Union, did well only in one area they innovated, Soviet Union. Defense. Why? Because they had a competitor there, which was the US. That's where they innovated. In everything else, they did not innovate. But the only innovation they had was in space and defense, because they had a competitor. So that shows my point. Okay, so now there is a second pillar. A second pillar, if you want to be an innovation-based economy, is to have Scranton University. Okay? You need good universities. And if you are in the business of imitation, it's enough to have good primary, secondary education and specialized undergrad or good undergrad. But if you're in the business of frontier innovation, you need good graduate schools as well. You need both. And you need good universities. And that's a very important, thing. France, for example, was good in primary, secondary education, but not good with the universities in France were very poor. We spend in France $8,000 per student. In the US, the average is $33,000 or $34,000. So France university is very poor. That's very bad if you want to be a frontier innovator. Okay, so here I look cross-state. That's an analysis with Caroline Hawksby from Stanford, where we look at the growth, at the long-term growth effect of spending more on various types of education. So to the left of the diagram, I have the frontier state. What is a frontier state? It's a state of the US whose per capita GDP is close to the capital GDP of the highest state. Which one is it? It's currently California. Okay? It used to be Michigan before, I don't know, during the early 20th century. But nowadays it's California. Okay. So what it says this diagram is that if you are a state whose per capita GDP is close to California, it's really research education that will give you the more growth. For your college is very important, but the growth will come mainly from that. It doesn't mean that you also need the first. I don't say cut and close down 2 years for your college. I say that you need on top of it research education. If you are Alabama and Mississippi, you don't need much of research education. You need mostly 2 years for your college. That's what's important, because you are more in the business of imitation. That's what this analysis says. It doesn't say you should close down all research in Alabama and Mississippi, but it says that the driver of growth will be more and it's the same across countries. The more developed a country is, the more it's research education that will drive the growth in this country. So that's a very important thing, the emphasis. For example, Sweden has made it very well because Sweden has invested a lot in its universities. You know that in Sweden, it's free. You don't pay tuitions. You can go to universities in Sweden, and you have very good universities where you don't pay a cent of tuition. So that, I think, has paid out. Switzerland is the same. In Switzerland, you don't pay a cent of tuition. And you have fantastic universities in Lausanne, Zurich, and everything. So that, I think, is a very important thing. But there is something else also, is not only, and I will get back to that, is not only you need well-funded universities, you need also well-governed universities. So, for example, it looks totally obvious to you in the US because you have well-governed universities where you have board, the president is named by a board. In France, it's a very strange country. You know who names the president of university? It's the students. I mean, the students are fantastic, but they may not know who are the professors to be hired. They may not know which president should be hired, you see? But on the other hand, in your universities, you can evaluate your teachers. In France, you cannot evaluate your teacher. That's much more important, that you tell the student, you know, is the professor doing a good job or a poor job? That in France you don't have. You can't judge your student, but you can elect the president of the university. So it's a very strange place, you know. But it's good to have strange places like France. See, everything that goes wrong is concentrated in one country, and then you can... Anyway, so that's a second pillar, and it's good governance of universities with good autonomy. When I say autonomy, it's budget autonomy, it's the decision to hire or not hire, the equipment. That is important, that universities have autonomy with respect to those decisions, and that it not be decided by the state or by the federal government. So the third pillar is labor market flexibility. Why labor market flexibility? Because when you are innovating, you need new workers. You see, it's new activities. So you need that there is flexibility. So you can, or suppose I am a firm and I have to change activity. I might have had people adapted, a labor force adapted to the old activities, but not entirely to the new ones. So I may need them to retrain or to hire new people. I need flexibility for that. So there's been work. That's a table. I don't want to show you what is on the table, but what this table says is that the more frontier a country is, the more labor market flexibility is growth enhancing. So what does it mean, labor market flexibility? Is essentially the possibility to hire and fire easily. You see what I mean? Or, so that's an important measure, and it's important to do that. So you need a system which has more market flexibility. Alors, of course, there is always the problem that you need to allocate workers from the red sectors to the blue sectors. So you may need to complete that by a retraining policy. You see, that's where the state is important. Because once I've said that competition, you know, enhances productivity growth in the blue firms, but discourages it in the red firms, of course, many of the red firms will close down or reduce activities, and you need to have this retraining policy for workers to be relocated and to help them relocate from red firms to blue firms. And so you need to accompany the labor market flexibility. That's why the training policy is important, and we can discuss that. Okay, so the fourth pillar is finance. When you are in the business of imitating, it's no big deal to have bank finance. But when you are in the business of frontier innovation, you need venture capital. You need business angels. And this diagram there shows that when you have a bank-based economy, as you move closer to frontier, growth goes down. When you have a stock market-based economy, the closer to frontier you are, the higher the growth. So you see that together, these pictures tell you that the closer you are to the technological frontier, the more your growth relies on frontier innovation, the more you need, market finance instead of just bank finance. It's not that you don't need bank finance as well, but you need on top of it market finance. If you are in the business of imitation, it's okay that you have essentially bank finance. Okay, so those are examples that, how you have to transform the country. France, for example, is a country with low product market flexibility, low labor market flexibility, insufficiently funded universities, and essentially bank finance, very little in terms of business angels and venture capital. So you see, we have all we have to transform. I don't know about Japan. Japan, I think competition is limited. Labor market flexibility is so-so. You have good universities, but finance is mainly bank finance. No? You don't have much of venture capital. So I guess we are in the same boat. Yeah, okay. Well, welcome to the club. Huh? Anyway, so this table, I don't want to detail this table. What this table tells you is it tells you two things. It says first that ICT growth, making it to the innovation-based growth, is very much related to how fast you adapt ICT, how much you adopt the ICT technology. ICT is what we call a general-purpose technology. It's a technology that is used in all sectors, like electricity was, like steam engine before was. I will get back to these technological waves in detail in the second part of the lecture. But the thing is that we see that there is a big correlation between growing fast at the frontier and having adopted ICT. But now, is ICT the reason? No, because in fact, those who adopted ICT were those who had flexible product market, flexible labor market, and good higher education system. Once you have those three things, the ICT variable becomes insignificant. Because in fact, behind it, there is these three things. Okay, labor market, and equity finance. When you have those four things, but at least the three, labor market flexibility, product market flexibility, and research education, when you have those three well done, ICT is automatically adopted. Okay, and therefore you grow. So that's what I wanted to. So now what I said that I would say those are the policies that you have to change when you move from imitation-based to innovation-based. You are imitation-based, no big deal that you don't have much competition because you have the same firms there. You are in imitation-based, no big deal that you have little labor market flexibility because people spend all their life in the same firm. You are in imitation-based economy, no big deal you have bank finance, no big deal that you have primary, secondary education, but not big research education. But those big things become important when you move to imitation. Now that brings you to the role of the state. So there is a big debate. On the one hand, you have the old left, what I call the old left, who says you should have the old welfare state as before. So I don't know here if you have that, I don't know what Paul Krugman or others, I don't want to incriminate, but I don't know, some people kind of say, keep the old welfare state. In France, you have some people who want to keep the old welfare state. On the other end of the spectrum, you have more, I would call it Tea Party, or we call them ultra-liberal in French, but liberal here means something different. It's, which are those who say you should have no state. Why have the state at all? So at the other end of the spectrum, there are those who believe that the state, it should just be about law and order. Have policemen, okay, and the army, and that's it. You don't need the state to put its nose in anything else but law and order, what we call the Regalian functions of the state. And I am a centrist. I believe that neither you should have the old welfare state, because you have to move to an innovation-based economy, nor should you have minimal state where the state is just withdrawing from everything. And why is that? Just not because I just like center and I like to compromise. No, it's because I think there is economic reasons. One of them is knowledge externalities. That means that, for example, education. If I decide to educate, it's good for myself, but it will be good for the people I interact with at work. I have knowledge externalities on them. I will have externalities on my children. I will have externalities on the economy as a whole, growth externalities. So the decision, but an individual that decides to pay for education does not internalize those externalities. That's why you need the state. There is a market failure there. That's why the state needs to step in. Health is the same. If I don't get health insurance and I get sick, I can transmit illnesses to other people. I don't internalize this decision. So it's important that the state steps in. Environment, when a firm produces and pollutes and innovates in polluting things, It has not only environmental externalities, but also knowledge externalities. You may induce others to also innovate in polluting technologies. That's something that individual firms don't internalize. You need, again, state intervention. So it's very important because of the knowledge externalities that you have state intervention. And that's magnified by the credit constraint, because you have people who want to educate, but they have credit constraint. When they borrow at the bank, but when you have a credit crunch, it's become very hard to borrow, and they may not borrow anymore. And that magnifies the effect of the knowledge externalities. Not only you have knowledge externalities, but you have credit constraint. And for both reasons, you have a scope for state intervention. So that's why I believe in state intervention. It doesn't need now. The question is, how should it intervene? And there, I think there are various rules. First is that you don't want to prevent market from working. You don't want to prevent innovation, but you want to facilitate innovation and make sure that it doesn't go in the wrong thing. So you want to be a facilitator. We need the state to make people, anybody who wants to undertake, anybody who wants to do things, it could become possible. So it's the state as a facilitator. But it's not the state as someone who assists people. It's not the state that will solve all your problem. It's the state that makes you be responsible. It's the state that forces you to take responsibility to say, if you do, we help. But if you don't do, we don't do things for you. We don't do things for you. We allow you to do things if you decide to do things. That's the new way of thinking. You see what I mean? So it's neither the state who says, you can get lost, if you get sick, too bad for you, you can die on the street. Okay, that's one hand. It's not the state that says, whatever, even if you decide to do nothing and sleep like that, we are there to assist you. It's a state in between who says, look, you don't want to do anything, too bad for you. You want to get things done, we are there to make things become possible for you. That's the middle road, you see? And that means a very important thing. It's an innovation-enhancing state. So what does it mean? It means first that you have to target your investment. And I will talk about that. Targeting investment means you have horizontal targeting. You say innovation, support to research is important. NSF is important. You say support to good health is important. You say Small Business Act is important to support innovating small and businesses because of the cycle. You remember the Small Business Act is a good response to what I was saying about the business cycle and make sure that firms can maintain their activities over the cycle. Okay, those things are important. So that's what we call horizontal targeting. And but what you have to be important is that also quality matters. So it's important that you have good governance of your investment. And let me give you 3 examples of what I mean by good governance of investment. Schools and universities will be my first example. Industrial policy will be the second, and macro policy will be the third. So let me talk about growth. Here it's a cross-country regression where you show on the horizontal axis the test scores. Okay, so it's you get how well you do PISA. You know, PISA test is a good measure of how good primary, secondary education is. You have people at the age of around 14, 15, and they do PISA test in reading, in math, in whatever, and science, I think, and you see how well they perform. And what we see is that if you regress growth, so on the vertical axis I have growth, and if you see that the correlation, so growth is vertical, and PISA test is horizontal. And you see there is a very positive correlation between PISA test and growth. So it's important to have good PISA test, I can tell you. That's first order, very important. You want anywhere to grow faster, good PISA test. Make sure you improve your PISA test in the US. Very important. Whatever you do, I don't care if your ideology. Look at your PISA test and see what your PISA test improve. So I'm sorry that I'm polar. So that's an interesting thing. Is that if you look at this figure. What you see here is that if you have on the horizontal axis the spending on education and on the vertical growth, there you don't see such an increasing. That means that there are countries that spend more on education, but without having higher growth. So what's important is not how much you spend so much, is how you spend it. For example, France and Finland, they spend the same fraction of GDP in education. Finland does much better. Why? Because Finland, they give priority to 2 things. Quality of teacher. You want to be a teacher in Finland, it's like if you're a minister. You are treated as well as a minister. When you say I'm teach even primary schools, you are considered like almost like a minister, like a, you know, Secretary of State or whatever. But you are a very important person. You do high school, then plus 5 years at university, plus 18 months of training to be a professor. And you recycle regularly, you retrain regularly. That's in Finland. The quality of teachers, very important. The second thing, that the tutorship, nobody is left behind because any children from the lowest background family, they have tutors to help them do their homework so that it makes up for the fact that their parents cannot help them do their homework. They put all the money on these two things. In France, they put the money on teaching crazy things that are useless or whatever they do. God knows what they do. I mean, they don't. They just the same amount of money. God asks, God, what do they do with it? What do they do with it? So the thing, and the performance is much better in Finland. You see, so it's very nice, important to know that it's not just how much you spend, it's how you spend. One example is the schools, but the other example is universities. This picture shows the spending per student on the horizontal axis and the Shanghai ranking on the vertical. Countries that spend more have better Shanghai ranking on average, better ranking universities. But it's not just the money that matters. What matters also is autonomy. Here, more autonomous university, as I told you before, they do better. So it's the governance of university as much as the funding. And in fact, you can show that the funding goes together with the governance. You need both at the same time. Money, if I give a lot of money to a French university where you don't have good governance, you waste the money. You need, so it's very important, this notion that you have good governance of the investment. The second one I want to talk is industrial policy. That's a big debate. We used to believe very much after the war in the 50s in industrial policy. You should help the big champions. Yes? You should invest in the big firms. But then some people question that. For example, Anne Kruger and others, they start saying, why should you have the government pick winners? Why is the government better place to pick winners? And there was a big policy question there. And the thing is that one view is to say avoid any form of sectoral policy. The other one is to say keep the sectoral policy as before. That's the old left. And the third view is to say reform it. And how you reform the policy? You reform the policy saying, well, you know, you have various reasons to have vertical policy. One is that I told you about the climate example. Yeah, some people innovate dirty, and they don't innovate in clean. You should be there to help them redirect technical change. Okay? So that's one thing. The other reason is that if you govern properly industrial policy, it can work well. I told you that competition is important. You can reconcile industrial policy and competition policy. For example, instead of saying I pick this firm or that firm, you say I choose a broad sector, and then within the sector, I maintain competition. I enhance competition within the sector. Okay, and that, which I did some work recently on China, on Chinese firms, showing that whenever you have industrial policy that maintain competition or increases competition, it works very well. So you can have rules, or for example, for exit, how you make sure that an investment that's not profitable is not pursued. You need rules for that. Co-financing between public and private sector can be very important in that respect, because then if it's not good, the private sector partner leaves, and therefore it's a good signal that the state should stop. Or you have international juries that reevaluate the investment every 4 years or 5 years, so that you have a kind of governance thing. So the idea is that it's not a yes or no, it's again a center position. If you properly govern, you can make things work better. So I would like now to jump into something else. So the first conclusion is that transition from imitation-based to innovation-based, you need to promote competition and turnover. You need to promote labor market flexibility. You need to invest more and better in higher education. And you need more supply-side and macroeconomic policy over the cycle. The challenge is for the state to help reconcile growth and reduction in public debt. So you need to reform the state. Means that don't spend in useless things. Target investment towards innovation-enhancing activities. You have horizontal targeting, but also vertical targeting. In both of them, improve the governance of the spending. So now I would like to talk about waves. So what we call Schumpeterian waves. Schumpeterian waves, and that's drawn from work that colleagues of mine have done over the world 1890, 2012. And you will have a bit of fun. And I look at 13 advanced countries, the G7 plus Spain, the Netherlands, Finland, Australia, Sweden, Norway, and the reconstituted euro area. And I look at labor productivity and TFP growth over the period. Okay, so, and those are quarterly data and annual data. So it's a lot of data. So look at productivity growth waves. Look at this. So in the US, you see that you have peaks in two periods. You have the first peak and the second peak. That was an industrial revolution, and this was what? Which one was this one? I cannot ask questions, you are too many. The first one, we'll get to that. It was electricity, essentially electricity and construction. I will get to that. The second wave was the ICT wave, okay? That happened in the 2001. Those are the peaks. Some people believe, like Gordon, that you are going down now and there is no way up. Gordon believes there will be no other way up. I believe very much there will be other way up. How can you believe there will not be? Intelligence, ideas flows faster than ever. People interact much more than ever. How can we believe? And already we see, you know, the clouds and all that. Already we see that there will be another wave. And so there is this big debate, will there be another wave or not? Okay, but so far that's what you have. Now, the first wave was the electricity, internal combustion engine, chemistry, communication. Also organizational change and financial development. And the second wave was ICT, okay? But now you can look at other countries than the US, and the other countries are delayed. The US is the leader, the others are the imitators, you see? So for example, in the US, the first wave peaks here. But you see, for the euro area, it's only in the 60s. So the first wave, we really completely, internalize it in Europe, not before the early 60s. You see what I mean? So it takes a long time. It takes 20 years delay between the US and Europe. And as for the ICT wave, if you look at the Eurozone as a whole, the ICT wave has not been there. You see it in Sweden, in some countries, but the Eurozone as a whole, you don't see the ICT wave. So there are big delays, and you would like to understand where the delays are coming from, okay? So, for example, here is between France and the US. You see the first wave, you see that France is delayed with respect to US, and the first peak. And then the second peak of the US is the one of 2000, but you don't see France having a peak at all for the moment. France is not benefiting from the ICT wave. So now, why do you have delayed? So for example, the first wave, the chemistry and electricity hit the euro area, Japan and the UK after World War II, and rather in the late 50s. Do you see what I mean? Whereas it hit the US in 1940. Or late 30s. The second wave is absent so far in the euro area in Japan and has a slow diffusion in general. Why is it slow? That's where market rigidity and education and higher education plays a role, but I'll get back to that. So now you want to look at country-specific productivity breaks due to idiosyncratic shock. So for example, Sweden in 1990 does big reforms. They say, God, we are sleeping there. So they did what Mrs. Thatcher did, but they did it a bit more with anesthetic. You know, Mrs. Thatcher is somebody who operates the sick without anesthetic. So many people suffer, you know. Go to Scotland and talk about Mrs. Thatcher. She's not very popular. They tried to have a national funeral for her. They had to stop it because it would go very bad. Okay? That's not the same for Carl Bildt. If you tried Carl Bildt or Göran Persson in Sweden, they could have national funeral because they put more anesthetic. Both cases you need to operate the patient, but you need more anesthetic. So anyway, in Sweden, they do market reforms in the late 90s. Why? Because Sweden, in the 1990s, they are taken by a big banking crisis. There is a big financial crisis in Sweden. The crown is falling down. They need to recover. So what they do, they did say we have to spur innovation. What they do, they have a big tax reform, which is the opposite of what Mr. Hollande has done in France. Or what Mr. Piketty would like France to do. Oh, exactly the opposite. Take Piketty, do the other, and then it works very well. So they did the opposite. They lowered capital income tax to 30%. It used to be with maximum tax rate at 72%. The maximum tax rate on labor income was 88%. They lowered it to 57%. They suppressed the wealth tax and the inheritance tax. I think they might have gone too far there. But the thing is that they spurred innovation. And they did labor and product market flexibility, and they reduced public spending. They really rationalized the spending in education and health and reduced the number of civil servants. So they did the lower state, but also strategic state. They maintained the quality of health education. They did not compromise on that. And what was the result? Is that in innovation, you can see there, you can see, you don't see very well, but you can see that there is an inflection in the growth rate of Sweden. I will tell you, it's an important one. It looks like zero now, but it's really an important inflection in the growth rate. Growth rate was like 1.5% before 1990. It goes to 2.5%, 3% after 1990. Growth and innovation and the flow of patents is fostered. You see what I mean? Suddenly booms. And in fact, it was very interesting because in spite of the fact they lowered the number of tax rates, the tax revenues were higher in Sweden because they had more wealth. They had more to tax. So at the end, the tax revenues increased, in fact, in Sweden. So that's an interesting thing. Now I compare to, and here you can see the spur in growth much better. It's written in French, but don't pay attention. You see the growth, you see the growth rate, it starts there. You see, it's a fantastic thing. And in fact, what you can show is that Sweden caught up with the wave. They caught up with the ICT wave. Remember I told you there is this wave and the second wave, the ICT wave. And what happened is that Sweden, the wave is like a train. You have to get on the train. And Sweden got on the train because they did the structural reform. They made more flexible labor and product market. They did flex security on the labor market, which is a combination of flexibility to hire and fire and training and subsidy to training. They had a tax reform and reform of the state, and all that together made the innovation and growth increase like that. Okay, and they could catch up with they could get the ICT wave. If you look at Japan now, it's exactly the other way around. Japan is tapering off. The growth is going down. It's exactly the opposite. The Swedish curve is convex. The Japanese curve is concave. You see? It's exactly the opposite. And if you look at countries, the reformers, Netherlands, big reforms in 1982 to liberalize product labor market and reform the state. Growth rate was at 0.5% between 77 and 83. Goes multiplied by 3 between 83 and 2002. Canada, big reform in the early 1990s. I met with David Dodge the other day, a week ago, who was one of the big architects of the reform in Canada. They had a growth rate of 0.3% between 70 on average annual between 74 and 1990. The growth rate multiplied by 4 if you look at the growth rate between 1990 and 2000. Australia, same thing, multiplied by 3, more than 3 the growth rate. Sweden had a growth rate of 0.4 on average between 76 and 92, and between 92 and 2008 an average growth rate, annual growth rate of 2%. So those countries have done the reforms, and they got the wave. You see that? So that reconciles. Remember I showed you this table, and I said this table says that there is innovation-led growth is correlated with ICT, but once you control for product and labor market flexibility and for higher education, the ICT variable becomes. You see that in the waves. You see that in the temporal, in the time series. You see what I mean? And that's the conclusion. So let me bring to my conclusion. You have waves. In the waves, you have leaders and followers. The leader is the US, and the followers is whoever decide to embark in the reforms. Structural reforms help wave diffusion. And now I want to end up. That's my last slide. And my last slide, and now I realize in my last slide that I didn't do the proper thing with the slideshow. Now, but now I don't want to do this because, of course, I should. Oh my God! Well, maybe I should redo the whole presentation. I'm sure you'll be very happy. My God! Oh God! That's a funny one. Yeah. Oh God! It was nice, huh? You see how nice it would have been, huh? Look at this. That's really cool, quoi. Oh my God! Look at this picture. Oh la la. Yeah. So the fourth slide, which is the most beautiful one, as you can see. I had this discussion, the big debate on the state now. You say some people propose to keep the old welfare state. Some people propose just law and order, and that's it, the state should withdraw. We said no, because you have externalities, you have growth externalities, and you have credit constraints. The combination means that you need government, but you need targeted investment, mostly horizontal targeting. Privilege the horizontal. education, higher education and research education, small medium-sized enterprises, good health system. That's very important. But sometimes you may want to give importance to vertical sectors like renewable energy. Like, for example, you are doing shale gas now. It's important. It might change the life. It changed the life of many people in Pennsylvania. It may change your life in Scranton. So you cannot just say, I ignore shale gas. Okay. You may want to go into biotech because health. You may want to have medicines which are more affordable because it would also help finance the health more easily and have more competitive, pharmaceutical sector. So there it's important to have state intervening. But you can do that in a way that preserves competition. So the thing is that if you decide to go vertical or even if you go horizontal, good governance is very important. You need to have good governance and transparency. And that's very important. I mentioned the example of the schools, the Finland versus France, the universities, where that you have the autonomy goes together with subsidies. I could have mentioned the health, how Sweden managed to keep the quality of the health system, spending much less on health because they rationalize the working of the health system. The industrial policy, I mentioned that you can reconcile competition and the vertical targeting. And that's an important one. The last one I would like to talk about is growth and inequality. I know that you've been, what should we be, we know in the US there's been a big concern that growth has gone with a big increase in the inequality between the very rich and the very poor. So the question is, what should you do about that? And I think there are various things you can do. Of course, taxation should be reasonably progressive. I mentioned the tax reform in Sweden, but Sweden keep a progressive tax system. The maximum tax rate is not at 0, it's at 57%, and you get there pretty quickly on labor income. And so Sweden maintains a reasonably progressive taxation system, although it's less crazy than it used to be. Okay, so you need reasonably progressive taxation. That's important. But you need more than that, because what's important is not only the inequality between Mr. A and Mr. B at a given moment in time. What's really important is what I call inclusive growth. What is inclusive growth? Inclusive growth is growth that includes everyone. That you know that wherever you want to do things, which family you come from, you can do it. It's really equality of opportunities. That's where it's very important. So progressive taxation on its own will not give it to you. What's important is to have good education system, to make it easy. For example, Sweden, you have free education there. That, of course, helps enormously in the social mobility. But you should at least make it easy for people to access education. So, for example, there were worries that tuition fees in the US are increasing too quickly, too sharply, and that discourages. And there's been studies by Josh Angris and others that it makes a big difference to have a large tuition. It's not true that you can always make up through the banking, through borrowing. It's not true at all. So there you have to be worried that tuitions get too high and then you prevent access to. So that's a big impediment to social mobility. Okay? So that's another one. But what I could show also is that labor and product market flexibility, in fact, what we could show is that not only it spurs innovation-led growth, but it spurs social mobility. Why? Because it's Schumpeterian again. It spurs creative destruction. What is the big force of mobility? Is that the new replaces the old. So if you make labor and product market flexibility, you allow new entrants to come in and innovate and replace. For example, in Sweden, the wealthiest man in Sweden is Mr. Skype. I thought it was IKEA, but it's now Skype. It's no longer Wallenberg. They displaced them. But 15 years ago, Mr. Skype didn't exist. You see what I mean? So you need to have the turnover. And that's very much Schumpeterian, because you see, I have my debates with Piketty, who is my colleague in France, and he says you should just tax capital more. In the US, maybe, but in France, no. In France, capital is already overtaxed. The big problem is what? Is it a problem that you earn much more than me? Is that in itself a problem? It's a problem only if using what you earn, you can put barriers for me to get somewhere. You see what I mean? The big problem is not that you have people who earn more than others. Is that those who earn the most, if they are capable to corrupt the system and put entry barriers to arrival of new people, then it becomes a problem, because then social mobility is prevented. So it's important to have competition policy, of course, limits that antitrust, limits the ability to do that. Also the political system. For example, in Sweden, you cannot finance campaigns. It's all publicly financed. In France, you have a ceiling. Sarkozy is having big trouble because he tried to hide financing of his campaign, you know. So the more you allow for private financing of campaigns, the more you, of course, make a bias towards the incumbents, towards entrants. But you see, the important thing is that the Schumpeterian framework, again there, helps you, gives you the way, a grid to analyze that. Is it bad to have inequality per se? No, as long as this does not prevent social mobility. If the inequality becomes an impediment to social mobility, then it becomes a problem. So that you fight against excessive progressive taxation, but not only through antitrust, through strict rules to control campaigns and the financing of campaigns. And there is a whole area, you see, policies that you can do to make sure that, you know, the very rich don't pervert the system and prevent entry of new talents, of new people who want to do things. And I'm doing currently a study, a very interesting study. I look at the interplay between innovation, top incomes, and social mobility. And based on US data, but we are looking at other data. You see that innovativeness, of course, increases top incomes. When you innovate, you get top income. But it's very interesting that innovation is positively correlated with social mobility as well. So when you spur innovation, you may have the effect of increasing top income, but if you do that only, you increase initially at least social mobility. Now you could say that eventually social mobility might be prevented, but at the time social mobility will be prevented, innovation will also be stalled. So it's very important to maintain social mobility because you maintain innovation at the same time. They go hand in hand. So that's very comforting because in a sense the policy that foster continuous innovation are also policies that foster inclusive growth. You see what I mean? They are policies that make sure that continuously the new replaces the old. And that I think the state has a role to play there. And of course, it's a delicate role because the state cannot substitute for the private sector and for the private people and the private initiative. The state can play a role of fostering. And the whole thing is to say, where do you foster and what is the middle road that you find? But I think I've given you some way, at least some thoughts for this, and I think I'd rather stop there at this stage. Thanks very much. I can take questions? Can I take questions?
Yes, this is a good time for questions.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, they are leaving. Yeah, people are leaving. Oh God. It's bad.
Okay.
I think people are leaving.
Hi,
Maybe
how's it
now.
going?
Yes.
In one of your slides, you showed a...
I can't hear you.
in one of your slides, you showed a chart that depicted the lead Schumpeterian... sorry, what's it called?
Yeah. Let me go back.
Schumpeterian, the peak in 1941 was United States, and then about 20 years later...
Yes, exactly. This one.
In 1961,
Yeah.
there was a peak of Japan.
Yeah.
Can you explain the differences in the peaks?
In height, it's just a scaling.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was a
Absolutely,
difference
it's a
in
scaling.
total. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Pope Francis has been saying that the economy that you're describing tonight excludes an awful lot of people. And
Who says that?
Pope Francis. He's a rather famous Jesuit.
Yeah. Paul France.
Yeah.
Paul France.
And he's saying that the market economy, or the economy you're talking about tonight, excludes large numbers of people. So if you accept that we're going to have increases in the use of technology, and that technology is going to accelerate creative destruction that you're talking about tonight, then that could mean that there's even going to be greater numbers, given this economy, greater numbers of people that are going to be excluded, that are not going to be able to adapt.
But that depends on the state. That's precisely depends on what the state does. I mean, if you have a state, for example, in Denmark, let me take you Denmark or Sweden. If you are unemployed, you receive a very generous unemployment subsidy, and you can retrain. There is a very good retraining system. You see what I mean? and you retrain, and you are offered new jobs. So the state steps in because it supervises the training system. It doesn't do the only thing himself, and make sure that new jobs are proposed. So it all depends how you are accompanied during periods where between jobs. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but
so that's why that's a world where you go to school, you go back to school regularly. You see what I mean? So if you have a view of the thing where you are still part of society when you don't have a job because you go back to school. You see, and that's a very different world where whenever you are unemployed, you are left alone. You see what I mean? So it all depends how the state behaves.
Yeah, but what do you do at large numbers of people who are not able to, like many in this room tonight, are able to adapt to those changing technologies? But what do you do about large numbers of people that are excluded, that in spite of education are not able to adapt to a very rapidly changing economy?
You need protection. So it's true, you have the weak, those who cannot adapt. You need to have systems of minimum income and give access to health and all this.
Okay, so how do we do that?
But you do that with the tax. That's why you need a taxation system also that allows you to finance, these kind of services. But it's true that you have people who are disabled or people who are in problems. They cannot adapt easily. They cannot rebound easily. And there you need, to make sure that you can ensure to them dignity. And that's very important. And you can do that. In Sweden, that's the case. There are people who are disabled and they are protected. They are not left on their own without anything. So if you are shown to be disabled and shown not to be able to adapt, you are taken care of. You see what I mean? So it's not you don't do that to everybody. You tell people, I'll help you if you help yourself. But there are people who cannot, and you can show they cannot. You see what I mean? And in that case, the state has to be there. Of course, I think that's the role of the state, to make sure that nobody is left on the street. You see what I mean? And that's how you do. You need a taxation system, you need a reasonably well designed, and you need also to target your investment, because when you target investment, you also leave room for this spending. You see what I mean? But it means that because you've reduced on the number of civil servants, or you reduced on taxation, which was kind of wasty spending, you leave room also for that. And I think that's an important function. And that can be done. There are countries that do it. So that can be done.
In the wake of the 2007-2008 financial crisis, do you think Schumpeter and you would have agreed with the bailout that the federal government gave the big banks? And if you don't agree, what would the current landscape of the U.S. banking system look now if there was no bailout?
The bailout of banks, you see, the thing is that the bailout of banks, the thing is that you wanted to avoid the reproduction of 1929, where it went much worse. In a sense, you see, it could have been much longer and worse, the recession. So you wanted to avoid that because there are many bad things that come with it. First, you destroy human capital. So it was not only the bailing out of banks, it was also the General Motors, the restructuring of General Motors. Was it a good or bad idea? That's an example of industrial policy, by the way. But it was also because you wanted to preserve human capital there. And that, I think, was a good idea. It was important to do that. Because the problem is, what is the counterfactual? If you don't intervene at all, the banking sector falls apart, and you can have a much worse situation. Of course, eventually you get back, but you may get back at a much higher cost in terms of criminality, in terms of many bad things that you may want to avoid. So that's where you have you have no choice but intervening. You see, because it's very interesting you mentioned the waves, because there's been very interesting work by a colleague of mine called Thomas Philippon at NYU Stern. And he showed that usually when the financial sector becomes very big is during the wave. During the wave, various things happen. Wage inequality goes up because there are those who adapt to the wave, those who don't. Typically, the big waves of increase in wage inequality coincide with the technological wave. Another thing that you observe is that the financial sector, you need easy money. Because a wave, it's a general purpose technology that you start using in every sector more and more quickly. So you need to have easy and quick money. That's why the financial sector grows. But at some moment, of course, it has to go down. So you see, those are phenomena linked to the waves. In fact, there is a link between the technological wave and the financial thing. It's not for nothing that the last crisis was 29. It was the wave of electricity. And this crisis is the ICT wave. You see what I mean? They are linked. And the question is how you manage them. And of course, bailing out big banks is not great, but at the end of the day, I think in the US, it didn't cost them more than, because I think they got back in their funding, no? Didn't they? So I think it was a wise decision to make. Well, and as much as it was not very wise to let let Lehman go under. You see, because that had a kind of although there is always the moral hazard reason, you have to make sure that the contagion, that you don't trigger something contagious. So there is a kind of difficult trade-off that you have to manage.
Hi,
Yeah.
thank you. It was a very good talk, very interesting. I have
Thanks.
one question on the ICT lag. Perhaps you can comment on it. Does it have anything to do with the consumer versus saver tendencies in the culture? Because you can give somebody money, but they may want to put it in the bank as opposed to spending it on ICT.
And that might be a reason. That could be an interesting thing also, that the saving behavior, the fact that, well, we save more in France than in the US. The US, we used to consume more, and we try to consume less and save more in France. Could have been a reason for the delay. But it's very interesting that you see those who got up, for example, the saving behavior didn't change dramatically in Sweden. What changed was the other things. So it's more, I think, linked to the supply side, I think. Because it's really when you observe the change in the supply side that they really catch up with the waves. So that's, I think, is a good natural experiment to show that it's, again, the supply side play a big role. I don't say, by the way, in Bolo, I say that the Keynesian part it's not important. I believe in automatic stabilizers. I believe that you have to maintain consumption over the cycle. I'm not claiming you should do away with that. But I'm just saying that you should add the supply side. I don't say that you should add the supply side at the expense of the other one. But the automatic stabilizer notion should extend beyond maintaining consumption, also to be maintaining training and R&D investment of firms over the business cycle. That's what I'm claiming, not that you should abandon the demand side.
Any other questions? We can take, I think, one more question.
We can take more questions. Me, I'm fine. I mean, we can go on.
Huh?
My train, they pick me up at 6 o'clock. So if you're free,
okay.
we are free. I can go until 6 o'clock.
Okay, then we can take 2 more questions.
Yeah, let's have fun a bit, no? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm happy to have discussion. I mean, yeah.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much, Philippe. That's a good speech.
Thank you.
Actually, I learned several things from your speech. One is you're talking about technology, innovation, policy, education.
And I don't know the technology of transparency myself. I'm far below frontier, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
That was the joke, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. My question is, I'm an MBA student. I'm studying here as a... What do you think the policy is important and as a free market is important?
Yeah.
I continue. Why I think about that, between developed country and the developing country, there's, big gap. In China, we got GDP is number 2,
Yeah.
But, almost 30 days, we nearly, have 15 days.
Yeah.
People can see Shangsha. That's the big
So let me
pollution.
answer China because we cannot go too long on the question.
Yeah, so what is important?
Yeah,
what's important, the policy and the free market?
Yeah. Because you see, you talk about China. I was in China last week. Last year, we met with the Prime Minister of China with Li Keqiang in December. The whole question of China is, I make a joke on that. They want to avoid the middle income trap. You see, China has been extremely good at imitation. But a number of countries like Argentina were good at imitation, or France or other, and they get stuck, and they cannot make the transition to innovation-based. So China has obsession now. They would like to make the transition to innovation-based economy. And they ask whether they can do that with the institutions that they have. So a very interesting question in China, I didn't show you other things, is that democracy, of course, becomes very increasingly important when you are in the business of frontier innovation. So it's important because you don't know from top down what should be done. When you are about innovation based, it's everybody, all of you who have to be inventive. You see what I mean? So the big question in China now, you need to have more competition. You need to have free universities. So the question is, can China make the transition to innovation based by changing at the margin institution or by rerolling completely. So there I have big debates with Daron, who came 3 years ago. Daron thinks we should disband the Communist Party in China. I believe that you can keep it and you can reform and get there to innovation base. But there are big discussions there. But that's a very interesting discussion. Can China make the transition from imitation based to innovation based, keeping all its institutions the same or reforming them at the margin? And that I think is a huge question. That's big open.
Okay, because the time is limited. Actually, I have a continued question. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, we should stop.
Thank you, Professor Aghion,
Yeah.
again for the nice lecture, and thank you for coming to the 29th Kennedy lecture. Good night.
I don't know, some people left, I felt bad. Some student left in the middle.
Yeah,
so because he didn't like what I said
No, it's some of them, they come because